Hello class, Mr. Fino here. This is Unit 2, Lesson 1 on the Rise of Sumerian City-States. So in this section, you're going to learn how geographic challenges led to the rise of city-states in Mesopotamia. So it's kind of like there's this thing led to that, which led to that, and it eventually leads to the formation of these city-states in Mesopotamia. So you can see here a picture of some fields on the left, in the middle, the Fertile Crescent, which we'll talk more about, and then on the right, what these early villages would have looked like. All right, first, where was Mesopotamia? So Mesopotamia was located in what is today the country of Iraq. So you can see that on the map on the right. You can see Iran on the far right, which is next to Iraq. There's Syria and Jordan and Saudi Arabia, but all this here, right? A lot of that is modern day Iraq. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers in Greek. So that word Mesopotamia literally means land between the rivers. And the two rivers that it's referring to are those in the Fertile Crescent, called the Tigris River and Euphrates River, which you can see better here. Tigris is the northern part, and then Euphrates below it, and they flow into the Persian Gulf. And this green area here is the Fertile Crescent, and you can see it's kind of shaped like a crescent, so that's where it gets its name. So how were the north and the south different of Mesopotamia? So the northern part of Mesopotamia, and this is early, think early Mesopotamia. The northern part of Mesopotamia was hilly and received rain. So like this picture on the left, it would have received rain, and that would have made it good for, they would have been able to grow crops they needed. And the southern part of Mesopotamia was flat, hot, and received little rain, like here on the right. The rivers overflowed sporadically, and the materials like wood and stone were difficult to come by. So the south did not have the water it needed, and they didn't have a lot of the other resources they needed as well in the south. So the north had the advantage. What were the four major problems of Mesopotamia? So these are the four problems they had in this region in the early times of Mesopotamia. So the first is there were food shortages in the hills, right? So the hills where they had the more resources and the rain and all that. Eventually, they were short on food. They had too many people and not enough food. There was an uncontrolled water supply in the plains, right? So right down below in the plains, didn't have what they needed. There were challenges in maintaining the irrigation system across villages. Right? So when they eventually built canals, to flow water to where it needed to be in in their fields, they needed a way of maintaining it and keeping it working. So they had to figure out how to do that. And there were attacks by neighboring communities. So pictures here represent that. Food shortages, uncontrolled water supply in the plains. Right, sometimes it would flood like this. Sometimes it'd be droughts with not enough rain. They had to maintain their irrigation system and attacks by neighboring communities. So first, the food shortages in the hills. So the foothills of the Zagros Mountains in the north were ideal for growing crops. This picture on the left is the picture of the Zagros Mountains. So this is what it would look like. There was mild weather, which means kind of not too hot, not too cold, and plentiful rain. There was wood for shelters and stone for tools. So the north, right, the foothills of the Zagros Mountains had a lot of the stuff they needed. But eventually, as the population grew, there was a food shortage. Right, too many people, not enough food. You're not going to have enough for everybody. Even though the south wasn't ideal, the northern people began moving there. This became known as Sumer, home to the Sumerians. So as this happens, right? If people don't have enough food or land, they'll move somewhere else, and they did that. They moved to the south. Um, so there was an uncontrolled water supply. Flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates, the rivers we talked about earlier, was unpredictable. Sometimes it flooded and killed crops, and sometimes it was completely dry and dusty. So it just depended on the rainy season. The farmers needed a way to control their water supply throughout the entire year. So their solution was irrigation systems with levees along the sides of rivers to prevent flooding. So you can see here what that might have looked like. Um, Levees are kind of built up um, earth, which creates a sort of man-made river or canal. Um, when the land was dry, they could poke holes in the levees to supply water. So they had these stored water, and by poking holes in it, they would then flow into wherever it was needed. They eventually dug canals to redirect water and dams to store water for the future. So a couple of other ways they um, were able to control their water supply. Maintaining the irrigation system across villages. So throughout the canals, there was a buildup of silt, which is this. It's kind of like mud, dirt with small rocks in it. And so the irrigation system went across several villages, so they needed to work together to clean and repair the canals. They had to clean out a lot of the silt that was building up. Right. So eventually, these villages joined together to join larger communities and eventually towns. So this need to work on the irrigation systems and keep them up to date and working. Eventually, that villages next to each other would join together and just create a larger community because it made sense. They needed to work together, so you might as well just form a larger community. And last year we have attacks by neighboring communities. So Sumerian cities fought over the right to use more water. So that's the big reason they would have gone to war is control of water. And even today, that's often an important thing. Sumerian cities upriver, which means those closer to the mountains at the top of the river, would redirect the canals, preventing the water from flowing to these cities downriver. So if you're at the top of the river, you have power, right? And in redirecting the water to where you want to in your own communities, it would prevent it from flowing down into other communities. And this led to disputes over water, which became so intense that there was bloodshed or war. For protection, cities began constructing walls made of mud bricks, like this picture in the center. The Sumerians also dug moats outside the city walls for additional protection. This picture on the right is not a Sumerian castle, but that's a moat around it. And though farmers lived outside the walls, they could enter for protection. So even though the farmers didn't live inside the city walls, they could still go inside, in times of danger. The creation of city-states. So the walled cities of Sumer became like independent countries known as city-states. So in all these, steps, leading up to, the village joined together to work on the canals, and then, um, it, after that, joining together and building walls around their communities to keep themselves safe. These independent countries or city-states were formed in Sumer in Mesopotamia. Food shortages led to the movement into the plains. So here, this sentence here kind of summarizes it. So food shortages led to the movement into the plains, right from north to the south, which then led to irrigation systems so they control their water. A coordinated effort to maintain these canals, right, they're working together to maintain them, and then eventually the construction of walled city-states. That's how city-states were formed. And here is a picture of one such city-state, So, in summary, in this lesson, we learned how small farming villages became large city-states in Mesopotamia. All right. Thanks, guys.